Greetings and welcome to another edition of The Great Goddess. Praise be to Goddess. Praise be to Goddess. Well, here it is another Wednesday, and today we have a very important topic for you. But before I get to that, I would like to give my weekly hints and tips for purification. One thing you can do when you're on purification is to avoid fat. Avoid fat and avoid fatty foods like butter, margarine, mayonnaise, and chocolate. Those are foods to avoid during purification. And we're about to get to chocolate in just a minute, but I just wanted you to know that fatty foods can cause skin eruptions, and they interfere with the purification process. So avoid fatty foods while you're on purification if you possibly can. And especially chocolate, because chocolate causes skin eruptions in some people and is really not good for purification. It's fine every other time, but not for purification. Which brings us to the subject of our video today, which is chocolate. It's made with child slave labor. Yes, I know this is a hard fact to swallow. It's hard to digest, but it's true. Child slave labor and chocolate go together. The problem seems to be the Ivory Coast. The Ivory Coast is where they make 70% of the world's chocolate. They grow it there. And they use child slaves from neighboring countries such as Ghana and other neighboring countries to the Ivory Coast as child slaves. And these child slaves, all they get every day is some burnt bananas to eat. That's all they get to eat. And they don't get anything else. And they're sick, they're poor, they have nothing, they have no money, and they never get paid for their labor. They just get a place to sleep on the hard floor, and they get bananas to eat, and then they, all day long, they chop open cacao pods with dangerous machetes to get at the chocolate seeds inside. And this work is very tedious and very dangerous. And these children are made to do it. They're slaves after all. They have no recourse whatsoever. So if you ever wondered if Africans can enslave other Africans, it's true. Africans do enslave other Africans. And here's the proof of it. Ivory Coast, child slave labor. Why do they use children? Because children are less likely to run away or protest than adults. And children are I guess, more maneuverable, and they can push them around easier. So they use child slaves to make the chocolate, and some adult slaves too, but mostly child slaves. And this is a horrible way to spend one's childhood. As a slave, I can't even imagine. I can't imagine what those children are going through. Now, there was a conundrum raised online about whether you should boycott chocolate. And a lot of people want to boycott chocolate. They claim, here's the claim. The claim is that if you stop buying chocolate, the plight of those child slaves gets even worse. Because if you don't buy chocolate, they can't make a living, and they can't pay a living wage to their workers which makes them use slaves even more, and the plight of those child slaves gets worse and worse and the maltreatment gets worse with lack of funds. Now, I disagree with this for very good reasons. I disagree because, first of all, there's middlemen who buy the chocolate and sell it to the chocolate companies. And these middlemen are greedy. And they have the transportation in the interior to get to these chocolate farms. And they go to the chocolate farms and they pay not a living wage to the farmers for their chocolate. And then they take the chocolate away and sell it to the chocolate companies for an inflated price. So they can pay anything they want to these farmers, and it's all profit for them and profit in their pockets if they can pay these farmers nothing nor next to nothing and pay them less and less for their chocolate and get more and more, reap more and more profits from the chocolate companies. So even if the chocolate companies paid a living wage, it would all go to the middlemen. The farmers would never see any of it at all. That's why it's so important to have chocolate co-ops. And co-ops make sure that the co-ops are run by the farmers themselves. And co-ops make sure that the farmers are paid a fair wage for their chocolate. They get paid what the market will bear for their chocolate, and they get a living wage from the farmers, get a living wage, and that eliminates the middlemen that do so much damage to farmers, to chocolate farmers, and to, of course, to their servants, the children that are enslaved and captured and who can't get away. So they claim that buying chocolate will help the children, but it doesn't really help them, because some of these farmers just enjoy having as much money as they can from there. Even with the co-ops, some of the farmers enjoy having child slaves around, because then they can pay nothing, next to nothing, for the labor and get their chocolate practically for free, and it's all profit for them. So the farmers are greedy too. So the co-ops don't necessarily solve the problem of child slavery. So what do you do? What do you do when there's so much child slavery going on and you don't know the solution to the problem? Well, I've thought about this long and hard, okay? I was kept up at night thinking about it and wondering what to do about it, and negotiating in my head, what is the best solution? What is the best thing to do? Should you boycott chocolate? Should you buy a specific brand of chocolate? Is one brand better than the other? Um, and what do the brands of chocolate do? What do they do about child slave labor, and to ensure that the farmers don't use child slaves on their farms? What are they doing to ensure this doesn't happen? Well, a lot of the chocolate companies are doing something about it, because there's been a growing demand that they do something about it. So they are doing something about it, but it isn't enough. You know, what they're doing isn't enough. They're not doing enough to help the child slave. So the way I look at it is, I don't want to be personally responsible for the suffering of any human being. And I don't want to be responsible for child slavery. No way. So I believe in just boycotting the chocolate companies. Just boycott them. Don't have anything to do with them. And buy your chocolate fair trade, if you buy chocolate at all. And fair trade chocolate is very specific. There's specific brands that you can trust not to use chocolate from the Ivory Coast, and to if there's enough demand for this chocolate, then they'll do something about the child slavery eventually, hopefully. It's very hard to find these child slaves and to help them because they're in the Ivory Coast and that country is in turmoil. They've had years of war in the Ivory Coast country, and it's been a disaster for them politically and economically. So it's very hard to help these child slaves. So I just recommend boycotting the chocolate altogether and don't eat chocolate unless it's fair trade. And the fair trade chocolate comes from countries like Colombia where they don't use child slave labor. And in fact, the fair trade chocolate, the best kind, is grown through co-ops. And these co-ops ensure that the chocolate is grown fairly without child slavery, and also make sure that the farmers are paid a living wage for their chocolate. Now, I told you before, co-ops don't work. They don't work in Ivory Coast, but they do work in other countries where child slavery isn't used. So it's good to buy from chocolate that uses co-ops, and it's good to buy fair trade chocolate. There's some specific brands. I like Equal Exchange. Equal Exchange chocolate, you can get it at any Whole Foods market, and it's a fair trade chocolate. Also, Theo's is another good brand of fair trade chocolate. So there's some good brands out there. Also, organic chocolate, because organic chocolate is by definition not made with child slavery, because organic chocolate doesn't come from Ivory Coast. Organic chocolate comes from countries like Colombia. So I recommend buying fair trade chocolate and buy from companies that treat their workers with fairness and who give something back to their farmers for their efforts, so that they provide fresh running water and provide education for children, that sort of thing. So buy fair trade and don't buy from the big companies, Nestle, Mars. Those are companies that or Hershey's, because those companies aren't doing enough to stop child slavery. They aren't ensuring that child slave labor isn't used in their chocolate. They buy from middlemen, and they don't ensure that child slavery isn't used. So buy fair trade chocolate. It's more expensive. Yes, it's much more expensive. In fact, it's 4 times what the going price is on the market for regular chocolate bars. But it's well worth it, because you're giving back to the children, and you're not endangering them or promoting child slavery. Just don't get involved. Don't be a part of it. Refuse to be a part of child slavery, and buy fair trade. And eventually the chocolate companies will get the message, and they'll start putting out fair trade chocolate themselves, because they want profits. So they want, if enough people demand it, they'll end child slavery in Africa. So that's it for this week. Have a great week and take care, and don't buy bad chocolate.